Gaza je mjesto gdje vlada najveća glad na svijetu. U Gazi glad nije posljedica prirodne katastrofe, to je politički i vojni izbor. Dok Izrael širi nelegalna jevrejska naselja na zapadnoj obali, Britanija uvodi sankcije i traži hitno zaustavljanje gradnje. Otkako je Izrael prekršio primirje u martu, više od 1300 palestinske djece je ubijeno, a oko 4000 ranjeno. Evropska unija zvanično je odobrila program zajmova vrijedan 150 milijardi eura za masovno naoružanje i jačanje odbrane u svjetlu ruske prijetnje i neizvjesnosti oko američke podrške. Newsmax Balkans uskoro prelazi u novu fazu, postaje Newsmax Europe, prva i jedina zvanična međunarodna ispostava Newsmaxa na svijetu. Ovo proširenje otvara vrata za novu vrstu međunarodnog izvještavanja, omogućava pristup širem evropskom auditorijumu, potvrđuje status Newsmaxa kao medijske mreže sa sve većim globalnim uticajem. Gost emisije je Rosen, šef dopisništva Newsmaxa iz Vašingtona, jedan od najiskusnijih novinara koji izvještavao iz Bijele kuće za više američkih administracija. Danski pjevač i producent Rasmus Andersen došao je u London u potrazi za višim obrazovanjem u muzici. 2014. legendarni band Diamond Head kontaktirao je Rasmusa i tako je postao treći pjevač benda. Večeras razgovaramo o novom valu britanskog rock metal žanra. Miksan s klasičnom muzikom Ross Puls Planete je upravo Rasmus Andersen. Izrael blokira svu humanitarnu pomoć osim onoga što na kapaljku ulazi u Gazu, saopćuje to Ured Ujedinjenih nacija za koordinaciju humanitarnih poslova, pri čemu gotovo nikakva gotova hrana ne ulazi u prostor koji je njegov portparol opisao kao mjesto gdje vlada najveća glad na svijetu. Bivši šef za humanitarna pitanja Ujedinjenih nacija Martin Griffiths izjavio je da se u Gazi dešava genocid, ocjenjujući situaciju kao nedvosmislenu. U intervju za The Sky News Griffiths je rekao da je glad već počela ubijati ljude te da se humanitarna pomoć koristi kao oružje. Istakao je da su izjave izraelskog premijera Benjamina Netanyahua dovoljno jasne i da otkrivaju stvarne namjere. Griffiths, poznat po smirenosti i svom vrlo diplomatskom pristupu, rijetko koristi ovako oštru retoriku, što čini njegovu ocjenu posebno snažnom i zabrinjavajućom. Izrael je prihvatio aktuelni američki prijedlog za mir u Gazi, a Hamasov odgovor se očekuje tek ovog vikenda. Iako detalji prijedloga nisu objavljeni, izvori Reutersa tvrde da predviđa početno 60-dnevno primirje uz oslobađanje 28 izraelskih talaca, kako živih, tako i mrtvih, u zamjenu za puštanje 1236 palestinskih zatvorenika i posmrtnih ostataka 180 Palestinaca. Plan također uključuje hitnu isporuku humanitarne pomoći Gazi, čim Hamas potpiše ovaj sporazum. Ipak, visoki zvaničnik Hamasa rekao je da prijedlog ne sadrži ključne stavke poput obustave izraelskih vojnih operacija u Gazi, povlačenja izraelskih trupa iz Gaze, niti osigurava slobodan ulazak pomoći. Garanti su ovog plana Sjedinjene Države, Egipat i Katar.
Mogu potvrditi da su specijalni izaslanik Witkoff i predsjednik podnijeli Hamasu prijedlog za prekid vatre koji je Izrael podržao. Izrael je potpisao ovaj prijedlog prije nego što je poslan Hamasu. Također mogu potvrditi da se ti razgovori nastavljaju i nadamo se da će doći do prekida vatre u Gazi kako bismo mogli vratiti sve taoce kući, a to je od početka bio prioritet ove administracije.
Ministar odbrane Izraela Izrael Katz izjavio u petak da je odluka o izgradnji novih jevrejskih naselja na zapadnoj obali historijski pokret tokom posjete jednom od naselja koje je izraelska vojska evakuisala još 2005. godine. Ministar je također oštro kritikovao francuskog predsjednika Emmanuela Macrona zbog njegovih nastojanja da prizna buduću palestinsku državu, rekavši: oni će priznati palestinsku državu na papiru, a mi ćemo graditi jevrejsko-izraelsku državu ovdje na terenu. Ova inicijativa uključuje i legalizaciju divljih naselja izgrađenih bez zvanične dozvole izraelskih vlasti. Organizacija Peace Now, koja se protivi širenju naselja, saopćila je da je ovo najopsežniji potez izraelskih vlasti od potpisivanja sporazuma iz Osla 1993. godine, koji su tada pokrenuli mirovni proces između Izraela i Palestinaca. Na zapadnoj obali danas živi oko 500.000 izraelskih doseljenika u više od 100 naselja, dok 3 miliona Palestinaca živi pod izraelskom vojnom upravom.
כדי להתחבר מחדש לשורשים הלאומיים והאישיים שלי. שירתתי בסנור כטירון בצנחנים ונאבקתי נגד עקירת היישוב במסגרת תוכנית ההתנתקות. הבטחתי אז שנחזור, והיום אנחנו חוזרים לכאן עם ההחלטה על הקמת היישוב מחדש, יחד עם הקמת עוד 21 יישובים חדשים ביהודה ושומרון. זהו רגע היסטורי להתיישבות ביהודה ושומרון, שיחזק אותה כחומת המגן של ישראל, וגם יחזק את הביטחון באזור הזה. וזה גם מסר ברור למקרון ולחבריו. הם יכירו במדינה פלסטינית על הנייר, ואנחנו נבנה כאן את המדינה היהודית-ישראלית בשטח.
A širenju nelegalnih jevrijskih naselja na palestinskoj teritoriji oštro je kritikovala britanska vlada. Britanska vlada obustavila je pregovore o sporazumu o slobodnoj trgovini s Izraelom, uvela sankcije protiv izraelskih nasljednika na zapadnoj obali. Britanski ministar vanjskih poslova David Lammy izjavio da je Ujedinjeno kraljevstvo ne može nastaviti trgovinske razgovore s izraelskom vladom koja je, kako je rekao, provodi ekstremne politike u Gazi i na okupiranoj zapadnoj obali. Lammy je najavio sankcije protiv 3 pojedinca, 2 ilegalna naselja i 2 organizacije koje prema britanskim tvrdnjama podstiču nasilje nad palestinskim stanovništvom.
The two-state solution remains the ideal framework, indeed the only framework for a just and lasting peace. But as the House knows, its very viability is in peril, endangered not only by the war in Gaza, but by the spread of illegal Israeli settlements and outposts across the occupied West Bank, with the explicit support of this Israeli government. There are now weekly meetings to improve new settlement construction. Settlement approval has accelerated, while settler violence has soared. Here too we have acted, repeatedly pressing for change in this course and direction, sanctioning 7 entities in October and signing a landmark agreement to bolster support for the Palestinian Authority when Prime Minister Mustafa visited London just last month. But here too we must do more. Today we are therefore imposing sanctions on a further 3 individuals and 4 entities involved in the settler movement. I have seen for myself the consequences of settler violence, the fear of its victim, the impunity of its perpetrators. Today we are demonstrating again that we will continue to act against those who are carrying out heinous abuses of human rights. Despite the glimmer of hope from January's ceasefire, the suffering from this conflict has worsened. But January showed another path was possible. We urge Netanyahu's government to choose this path. The world is judging. History will judge them. Blocking aid, expanding the war, dismissing the concerns of your friends and partners, this is indefensible and it must stop. I commend this statement to the House.
11-godišnja Yakin Hamad, poznata na društvenim mrežama po svom neodoljivom osmijehu, savjetima za preživljavanje koje je nudila usred rata, ubijena je prošle sedmice u izraelskom granatiranju područja Al-Baraka koje se nalazi na sjeveru pojasa Gaze. Yakin je bila najmlađa influencerica u Gazi, a njeni videozapisi koji su prikazivali teške uvjete u enklavi prikupili su na 1000 pregleda na raznim platformama. Zajedno sa svojim starijim bratom dostavljali su hranu, odjeću i igračke raseljenim porodicama, pokušavajući pružiti utjehu djeci koje su svakodnevno proživljavala ratne strahote. U nekim od svojih videa Yakin je davala savjete za preživljavanje stanovnicima bombardiranih područja, objašnjavajući, na primjer, kako kuhati bez plina koristeći improvizirana rješenja. A Izrael je u ofanzivi na Gazu koja traje više od 19 mjeseci ubio preko 54.000 ljudi, među kojima 18.000 djece. Humanitarna kriza dodatno je produbljena višemjesečnom blokadom hrane i medicinske pomoći zbog koje djeca umiru od gladi. Javnost sada češće govori o ratu istrebljenja i ratnim zločinima koje, kako se navodi, izraelska vlada sprovodi namjerno i planski. Španija, Irska, Slovenija i Norveška oficijalno su pozvale primanje Palestine u puno članstvo Ujedinjenih nacija. Upozoravamo na potresne snimke. Uprašeni ruševina među krhotinama razorene infrastrukture i pod neprestanim zvukom bombardovanja, djeca Gaze preživljavaju ili ginu dan za danom u hororu koji je međunarodna zajednica sve teže spremna ignorisati. U izraelskom listu Haaretz bivši premijer Ehud Olmert šokirao je izraelsku i svjetsku javnost izjavom da ono što njegova država čini u Gazi predstavlja rat istrebljenja. Olmert je jasno poručio da su izraelske operacije u Gazi neselektivno, neobuzdano, brutalno i kriminalno ubijanje civila, te da su rezultat namjerne, zlonamjerne i neodgovorne politike aktuelne vlade na čelu sa Benjaminom Netanjahuom. U Gazi glad nije posljedica prirodne katastrofe, to je politički i vojni izbor. Višemjesečna blokada hrane i medicinske pomoći rezultirala je smrću desetina djece od gladi i bolesti. Generalni sekretar Ujedinjenih nacija Antonio Guterres osudio je izraelsku ofanzivu zbog užasavajućih nivoa smrti i razaranja, dok su čelnici Velike Britanije, Francuske i Kanade pozvali na hitno zaustavljanje vojnih operacija i omogućavanje pristupa humanitarnoj pomoći. Skladište Ujedinjenih nacija u centralnom dijelu pojasa Gaze provaljeno je u srijedu dok su očajni i gladni ljudi upali u objekat u potrazi za hranom. Prema izvještaju Svjetskog programa za hranu, u incidentu su poginule 2 osobe. Palestinski ambasador pri Ujedinjenim nacijama slomio se u suzama tokom obraćanja Vijeću sigurnosti.
Unbearable. How could anyone tolerate this horror? Excuse me, Mr. President.
Djeca, desetine djece umiru od gladi, rekao je kroz suze, opisujući scene majke koje u naručju drže beživotna tijela svoje djece, češljaju im kosu, pričaju im, izvinjavaju im se. Hamas je saopćio da je postigao dogovor s američkim izaslanikom za Bliski istok Stevom Witkofom o općem okviru za prekid vatre u Gazi. Novi prijedlog Sjedinjenih država za prekid vatre i razmjenu talaca između Izraela i Hamasa predviđa oslobađanje 9 živih talaca i 18 tijela zarobljenih osoba uz mjesečno primirje i djelomično povlačenje izraelske vojske iz pojasa Gaze. Netanjahu s druge strane i dalje odbacuje međunarodne kritike tvrdeći da su one izraz antisemitizma i podrške terorizmu. Na kraju sve se svodi na pitanje morala. Kako svijet može mirno gledati gladnu, ranjenu i ubijenu djecu, a da ne reaguje? Fotografije iz Gaze danas nisu tek dokumenti rata, one su optužnice protiv ljudske neosjetljivosti. Palestinski ambasador pri Ujedinjenim nacijama održao je, kao što ste vidjeli, emotivan govor pred Savjetom sigurnosti Ujedinjenih nacija u kojem je u suzama u očima opisao smrt više od 1300 palestinske djece od završetka primirja u martu. Poslušajmo i njegov cijeli govor.
Since Israel broke the ceasefire in March, over 1,300 Palestinian children have been killed, and around 4,000 have been injured. These are children. Children. And still, a war against barbarism. Children. Dozens of children are dying of starvation. The images of mothers embracing their motionless bodies, caressing their hair, talking to them, apologizing to them. It's unbearable. How could anyone tolerate this horror? Excuse me, Mr. President. I have grandchildren. I know what they mean to their families. and to see the situation of the Palestinians without us having hearts to do something is beyond the ability of any normal human being to tolerate. Flames and hunger are devouring Palestinian children. This is why we are so outraged as Palestinians everywhere, the 14 millions of us in the occupied territories, in the diaspora, in the refugee camps, in far places, all the way to California and in between. We love our children. We love our people. We don't want to see them going through this tragedy and this savage attacks by those who claim the virtues of fighting against barbarism. Nothing can justify attacking civilians, whether Palestinians or Israelis. Double standards no more. We are human beings. We are proud Palestinians. We sit around this table. We should be treated exactly like everybody else. Not to see what you want to see in the mirror and to ignore the obvious, the huge elephant in the room, the Palestinian people.
Evropska unija zvanično je odobrila program zajmova vrijedan 150 milijardi eura za masovno naoružavanje i jačanje odbrane, a u svjetlu ruske prijetnje i neizvjesnosti oko američke podrške. Program SAFE, finansiran iz centralnog budžeta Evropske unije, omogućava kupovinu oružja i opreme, uključujući od proizvođača izvan Unije te iz Ukrajine. Ovo je dio šire strategije evropske strateške autonomije i smanjenja zavisnosti od Sjedinjenih država. Evropski ministri dali su zeleno svjetlo uz 26 glasova za i jedan uzdržan, ističući da je ovo samo prvi korak ka jačanju evropske odbrane. Američki predsjednik Donald Trump odustao je od uvođenja carina od 50% Evropskoj uniji narednog mjeseca. Pristao je na produženje odgode do 9. jula kako bi se omogućili pregovori između Vašingtona i Brisela. Trump je u petak izjavio da preporučuje da carina od 50% stupi na snagu 1. juna zbog frustracije što pregovori sa Evropskom unijom ne napreduju dovoljno brzo. Ova prijetnja uzdrmala je globalna financijska tržišta i dodatno zaoštrila trgovinski rat koji je obilježen čestim promjenama tarifne politike prema trgovinskim partnerima i saveznicima Sjedinjenih Američkih Država, uključujući i Evropsku uniju. On today's show, we take a sharp look at U.S. leadership through contrasting presidential styles. We'll explore Donald Trump's deal-oriented foreign policy versus Joe Biden's more bureaucratic approach. We'll also examine Trump's avoidance of new wars and his rare GOP stance on humanitarian aid and human rights. On the economic front, we'll assess Trump-era growth versus Biden post-pandemic challenges. Further, we'll revisit a moment that captured national attention when Newsmax chief Washington correspondent James Rosen directly questioned President Biden about his cognitive fitness, triggering significant backlash and opening a broader debate about presidential competence and media accountability. I'm being joined by Newsmax chief Washington correspondent James Rosen. James, welcome to Newsmax Balkans, and thank you for joining.
Well, I'm very grateful to be with you.
Such an honor to have you on the show, James. When you publicly questioned President Biden's cognitive fitness, with all the respect and journalistic integrity that you have, it sparked significant backlash, not just from the White House, but also from corner of the media establishment. Now, let's revisit that moment. What was your thought process in framing that question? And did the reaction surprise you, given the growing public and private concern around this issue? You weren't even allowed to ask any more questions for 8 months.
All of that is true, and I wanted to be respectful in asking the question. And really, I knew that I had a perfect peg for asking the question, which was the appearance that very morning in Politico, which is nobody's idea of a right-wing outlet, of a poll conducted with Morning Consult, which is a reputable polling organization, that show that nearly half the American electorate, at that point, this was January 19, 2022, Ika, President Biden was not fully 1 year into his term yet. And even at that point, this poll showed that nearly half the American electorate believed, did not agree with the statement, quote, Joe Biden is mentally fit. I don't want to tell the whole question if we're going to play the clip.
Yes.
Thank you very much for this honor. James Rosen with Newsmax. I'd like to raise a delicate subject, but with utmost respect for your life accomplishments and the high office you hold. A poll released this morning by Politico Morning Consult found 49% of registered voters disagreeing with the statement, Joe Biden is mentally fit. Wow. Not even a majority of Democrats who responded strongly affirmed that statement.
Well, I'll let you all make the judgment whether they're correct.
Well,
Thank
so
you.
the question I have for you, sir, if you'd let me finish, is why do you suppose such large segments of the American electorate have come to harbor such profound concerns about your cognitive fitness? Thank you.
I have no idea.
So, James, looking back, do you see that moment as a shift in how the White House press corps approaches uncomfortable yet essential questions? And what did the reaction from both media establishment and political institutions reveal to you about the current limits and underlying biases in Washington journalism?
It seems to me, Ika, that had that moment been a shift, we would have seen my colleagues in the White House Press Corps and the White House Correspondents Association become more aggressive in pursuing this particular issue of the president's cognitive fitness. Instead, I was the only one to ask a question about that for something like 2+ years. Certainly, it was well after the president had declared for re-election in the spring of 2023. And I wish there had been a shift. And instead, I was made by my colleagues to feel rude and fringy. There were some caustic and condescending, sarcastic comments from hosts on MSNBC and from other precincts. But in the end, we now know, after the withdrawal of Mr. Biden from the 2024 presidential contest, that in fact I was asking about the defining issue of the Biden presidency. It's important also to note, Ika, that we are in the infancy of this story. I say that because while we have seen some reporting emerge during the president's term about his condition, and while we've seen one blockbuster book published by a couple of well-known reporters here in the United States in which my exchange with the president was mentioned early on, we really still await the additional memoirs and autobiographies and accounts of key players in the Biden presidency, including the president and the first lady themselves. And we will see not from them, but from more junior aides, really for money, people trafficking in stories about what they knew and when they knew it about the president's decline. And then the greatest prize of all, Ika, will be in still further years to come, archival disclosure, where we will finally, when there's a Biden presidential library, and presuming all the classified and other materials are where they're supposed to be, we will get our hands on the White House memoranda, emails, and texts that will reveal to us the mechanics by which this quixotic effort at concealment of the president's condition was actually managed day to day, and through which we might finally get an answer to the overriding question, who was really running the country in those years?
That's a good question. I know you don't like private questions, but I am going to ask you this question. Now you are on the other side of it, and you've seen it, and you see how even our colleagues can be in the media. Have you ever received any apologies from your colleagues in Washington?
You ask about apologies. I have a better chance of winning the lottery than receiving one of those in what we call #ThisTown of Washington, D.C. It's not important to me to receive. I'm proud of the work I did. It speaks for itself. And as you have been kind to point out, I paid a heavy price for it. I was blackballed by the Biden White House in the form of its press operation, and specifically the person of Jen Psaki and then Karine Jean-Pierre, from asking any questions in the White House press briefing room for 8 months at that time. And that turned out not to even to be the longest of the Biden administration's freeze-outs or blackballing periods with me. The final 14 months of the Biden administration, I was not permitted to ask a question And Newsmax has a seat in the White House press briefing room, 6th row of 7, dead center with the lectern. I have been a member in good standing, more or less, in the White House Correspondents Association since the late 1990s. I show up every day, or was showing up every day at the White House. And I was respectful and polite in how I went about my business. And if you check off those 4 boxes, generally speaking, the press secretary is supposed to call on you. But they were punishing me for the questions I asked. I mentioned the final 14 months of the Biden administration. I was blackballed from asking any questions by Karine Jean-Pierre, and that's because my final question to her in a briefing in November of 2023, I guess it was about polling data and whether the 2+ years of polling data that showed that Americans were giving President Biden negative reviews in his job performance, if those 2 years of polling data were legitimate, and if she had any basis on which to challenge that data. And she told me flatly, we're not going to change the minds of the American people. We get that. And that was a stunning admission by Karine Jean-Pierre at that time, basically acknowledging the president was going to have to stand for re-election with his job approval ratings underwater, that nothing they had tried had worked, like the use of slogans like Bidenomics, et cetera. And people were astonished that the press secretary would say such a thing, so ill-advised, from the lectern at the White House briefing room. And that's why I wasn't called on again for another 14 months, the final 14 months of the administration.
That is incredible. I want to thank you for journalistic integrity. Sometimes it just takes time for the truth to come out, and you were patient, so thank you for doing that. It's definitely a lesson to all of us, for all of us. Thank you for doing that. All right, I have two more questions very quickly. I know we're running out of time, you're very busy. All right, let's talk about Trump. How would you characterize the long-term impact of Donald Trump's transactional approach to foreign policy, particularly landmark deals like the Abraham Accords or the $142 billion arms agreement with Saudi Arabia on America's global influence? Do you believe this model of diplomacy, often criticized as unsophisticated, in fact delivered more tangible results than Biden's multilateral institutionalist approach?
For sure, the two men employed very different approaches to international relations. President Biden proclaimed himself a champion of the transatlantic model and sort of sought a return to the kind of stability through international organizations that characterized the post-war period. And he wanted to work through NATO and the EU, and he did. But he also, President Biden, back when he was former Vice President Biden and was a candidate for the presidency, referred to Saudi Arabia as a pariah state, and that caused him all sorts of problems when he became president because of inflation and the price of oil and the centrality of Saudi Arabia to American foreign policy in the Gulf. And eventually, President Biden had to sort of go hat in hand and have that famous fist bump with the Crown Prince, Mohammed bin Salman. For President Trump, it's almost inappropriate really to speak of the long-term impacts because after all, he's really only less than 6 months into his second term. But you noted, for example, the Abraham Accords, and that showed something about Donald Trump as a statesman, which is important, and that is his capacity for outside-the-box thinking. We saw that when he was president the first time, also in his decision to travel to the demilitarized zone to meet with Kim Jong-un of North Korea. Which was a very daring move in certain respects. It kept the Korean Peninsula quiet for the duration of Mr. Trump's term. In the use of the military, both commanders-in-chief were pretty sparing. President Biden limited his direct military action to some strikes in Syria and a campaign against the Houthis. And President Trump has made very clear that he doesn't want to be the initiator of wars. He wants to be seen as a peacemaker. President Richard Nixon said, I think in his first inaugural address in 1969, that history has no greater honor that it can bestow than the title of peacemaker. And it's clear that President Trump is seeking that mantle. However, his diplomatic efforts in the Russia-Ukraine war and in Gaza right now seem to be unavailing.
Sometimes even unorthodox approach makes the difference, but it takes courage to take those steps. Before I let you go, I do have one more question. Actually, I have many questions, but of course, I don't want to take I would love to have you back. I would love to have you back. There's so much to discuss, but I do have one more question before I let you go. All right, you probably heard this, but with Newsmax Balkans expanding across Europe and soon becoming Newsmax Europe, the only official international branch of the network. So how does this development broaden your perspective on global reporting? What opportunities or responsibilities, even with someone who is a journalist with integrity, do you see emerging as Newsmax brings its distinct editorial voice to the wide European audiences?
Ika, I think it's good news for Newsmax and good news for Newsmax Balkans, that Newsmax Balkans, I think, will not for very long stand as the only international outlet of Newsmax. I think we're going to hear about additional viewers in additional venues, and it's going to be exciting. And this is all a testament to the vision of Chris Ruddy, the founder and CEO of Newsmax. We also recently launched our IPO and became a listed commodity on Wall Street, and it was a great honor for this reporter to attend the ringing of the New York Stock Exchange bell on the floor of the New York Stock Exchange by Mr. Ruddy as Newsmax went public. And so it's an exciting time of growth. We do have a unique editorial perspective, and I think we're fair to large swaths of the American electorate and its preferred candidates in a way that some other networks may not be.
I'm really looking forward to meeting you one day and discussing these topics in person. And of course, I'm looking forward to seeing you again on this show. Thank you, James. Thank you so much for being with us today.
Thank you, Ika.
Thank you. Chief Correspondent, Washington Correspondent James Rosen was my guest. Stay with us. Kit Kellogg, posebni predstavnik predsjednika Donalda Trumpa za Ukrajinu i Rusiju, izjavio je kako Sjedinjene Američke Države priznaju legitimnost ruskih zahtjeva o neširenju NATO-a na istok, te da su spremne razgovarati o ovom pitanju kao dijelu mirnog rješenja rata u Ukrajini. Predsjednik Donald Trump može obećati predsjedniku Vladimiru Putinu da se NATO neće širiti na istok ako takav zahtjev postane uvjet za okončanje rata u Ukrajini. Ovo se ne odnosi samo na širenje alijanse na Ukrajinu, već i na Gruziju i Moldaviju, ali ulazak Ukrajine u NATO nije na stolu i nismo jedina zemlja koja ima takav stav, naveo je to Kellogg.
As you try to fix it, and as you survey this hellscape of the Ukrainian front lines,
it's horrible.
And you and your team deal with a very stubborn Vladimir Putin.
Yeah.
Do you look
and Zelensky?
Yeah. But do you look at this
very
conflict
Zelensky too.
any differently now? Like, do you look at this and see Putin as the good guy or the bad guy?
So I've known him very well, and I went through a lot of things with him because Russia was, the Russia hoax turned out to be a total hoax. New York Times, they got a Pulitzer Prize. They have to give back the Pulitzer Prize. That's my lawsuit, and they're doing very poorly in that lawsuit. But they wrote stories about how it was true and it was false, and a lot of Washington Post also. I have gotten to see things that I was very surprised at. Rockets being shot into cities like Kiev during a negotiation that I felt was maybe very close to ending. We were going to solve a problem, and then all of a sudden rockets got shot into a couple of cities and people died. I saw things that I was surprised at. And I don't like being surprised. So I'm very disappointed in that way. With that being said, I'd like to see it end.
So many of the things that you're trying to do are held up in court right now. If the courts are going to have so much influence over U.S. policy, do you wish you would have just become a judge instead?
Yeah, well, look, it wasn't meant to be that way. If you look at the founders, the president had certain powers, and you have your three groups, and they all had supposed to be pretty equal powers. But you can't have a judge in Boston running foreign policy in places all over the country because he's got a liberal bent or he's a radical left person. That's what the executive branch is for, and you have checks and balances. But we had millions of people pour into our country, many criminals poured into our country, murderers, mental institutions from all over the world being emptied out into our country. And if we don't get them out and get them out quickly, could lose your country very easily. This is a bad, that anybody would allow this to happen to our country.
I think the fundamental moral flaw of the left is empathy for the criminals and not empathy for the victims. Empathy for the criminals, but not empathy for the victims. And there's been way too much of that. That needs to stop. To the President's point, there's been immense judicial overreach that is unconstitutional. That was never intended. And it's undermining the people's faith in the legal system. It needs to stop. It's gone too far.
Rasmus Andersen is Danish-born singer, composer, producer known for his powerful voice and diverse musicianship. After relocating to London in 2004-2005 to pursue formal studies in music, Ras quickly established himself in the world of rock and heavy metal. His work spans across vocal performance, music production, and orchestral composition. Notably, in 2014, he became the frontman for the legendary British metal band Diamond Head, breathing new life into this band. Ras is actually joining me from London. Ras, welcome to Newsmax Balkans, and thank you for being here.
Pleasure. Thank you for having me.
It's been quite a while since we spoke to each other, and I want to take you to your journey from the very beginning. So let's talk about 2004, 2005, when you moved to London to pursue higher education in music. How did immersion in such a diverse and dynamic musical environment influence your artistic trajectory and vocal identity?
I think it's nothing is more healthy than having multiple cultures around you and people from different countries to inspire you and teach you things that you don't know. You're always going to learn something from anyone who's from a different corner in the world, and especially in a creative aspect. It definitely fueled a lot of interest in trying different things out vocally and sonically. To be around a lot of these people, either from Greece or Poland or, yeah, you name it. I think I counted about 17 different nationalities once in my flat in London back in those days. Yeah.
And of course, diversity is everything that makes us. The more diverse environment it is, it makes us who we are today. It made you who you are today. Can you tell me more about those beginnings in 2004, 2005? What was the most difficult thing that you encountered in a new surrounding and starting off as a new musician?
It's so long ago, I can't even tell you. I think whenever you are young and you move to a big city, there's a lot of challenges to adapt to and learn.
Well, I'm thinking it's 20 years ago, actually. You're not that young anymore, Russ.
I'm still young and I can still tour.
You can still tour. All right. We'll talk about it in a second. Go ahead.
Yeah. It was an interesting time. I think for anyone who's ever tried to move countries, it is a very maturing experience to do so, and it throws a lot of life's dilemmas at you that you have to navigate while you're trying to navigate who you might become and draw inspiration from that. So it's I'm trying to think about what stories I remember. I'll tell you what, one thing, I remember having to get a piano and I had to carry it by hand on the tube from central London to the far west. That was a fantastic workout, carrying about 40 kilos on the tube.
It was, makes you who you are. Like I said, your struggles make you who you are. Tell me, let's go to 2014, okay, to Diamond Head. This is one big chapter for you. When did you said, okay, I want to do metal. This is what I want to do. This is what I want to be. You landed the audition in 2014 with the Diamond Head. Can you tell me more about that, how it went? When did you notice that, okay, this is what I'm going to be doing from now on?
I think, I mean, it is a funny sort of transition because I didn't start out wanting to be a rock metal guy. I was actually the total opposite of the spectrum, and I wanted to be in the pop side of things. But it was very clear to me that my character and personality, and probably also my Viking culture, fueled that bit of aggression and energy and need to be a loud person, which is very much part of my character. That's always sort of been in my blood regardless. Getting the audition with Diamond Head was interesting because at that point I didn't know anything about them, to be honest. I totally skipped the Diamond Head area and Garage Inc., as it were, with Metallica, that I was not aware of any of these massive, massive links in metal history. But immediately, you know, getting into that side of metal, which besides metal having progressed as much as it has, was quite, you know, an eye-opener, and feeling, okay, this is a place where I can actually rev the engine at full and just let go. To some degree, whatever I was allowed to do in Diamond Head. I've since had some other experiences and auditions we can talk about if you like, where I had to try and find something completely different and totally outside of my comfort zone.
Oh, wow. So you actually wanted to be in pop music and you ended up being a metalhead. How does one go from that to that? It's like from 0 to 100 in a day.
It's called an epiphany. An epiphany and a realization that the soul and the communication between the various genres has more of a sincerity to it. If I'm all honest, let's think about pop. It is what it is. So currently, there's not much going on with Diamond Head on the touring aspect because Brian is very busy with Saxon. We have just released a live album that was from the last tour that we did, which I think is out very, very soon. Which we're quite excited about, and there's going to be a lot of stuff coming out with that. But besides that, I have been busy working in other touring projects such as the History of Rock, but also more so recently in January I got asked to take part in something called the London Symphonic Rock Orchestra, which I'm not kidding when I tell you it's an incredible experience, not only to be part of it, but also for people to see it as a show, as a concept of taking contemporary rock and heavy songs and making them into an orchestral arrangement, both with vocals and without vocals. It's quite something.
Amazing.
Brilliant.
Yeah.
One of the best shows I've ever seen.
Yeah, fantastic.
It's absolutely fantastic.
It was excellent, brilliant, fantastic, and every other big word.
Come back and see us again.
Yes, yes. Absolutely. Yes, yes.
When these guys, they play System of a Down as an orchestra, it's quite crazy because it's not a normal orchestra. They play through pedal boards like guitarists will do, and they have custom-made instruments specifically made for the purpose of this kind of show. And it's quite something. So I really enjoyed doing that in January, and I'll be back on the road with them next year. And I've got one show this year in Canterbury as well. It's not usually my gig, as it were. It's my very good friend Jesse Smith, who is a phenomenal vocalist, who usually also is out with the classic rock show with Pete Thorne.
Are you vocals when you're with them?
Yes.
Yes. Can you tell me about the concept itself? Because usually when we talk about metal and rock, we don't really see it combining with violins, for example. But it sounds really powerful. Can you tell me more about that concept? How is it guided? Who guides it? How do you guys get together? Who writes it? How does that entire process happen?
Well, you've got the two producers that are at the head, which is Laura and Jess, and they take care of basically everything. They run the show, they write all the arrangements, they decide what to change up and how they want to do things. It's really their sort of dream. From memory, I think because they're both string players, classically trained, and they had a meeting, or they were out playing or touring somewhere in the world, and someone said, why can't you do something like that but with that music? And they thought, why not? And then they started sort of putting the concept together and working out what kind of songs and music they could arrange in a way that would work across the instrumentation and the arrangements to still have the punch and effectiveness that you'd imagine. And that's when they came up with, okay, we're going to play through electric pedal boards, like the ones that you would see on usually the guitarists will play through as modelers, and all the effects. And that includes all the brass and the cellist and the double bass. It's crazy the kind of sound that you can get out of a string orchestra if you put them through these kind of pedal boards to morph the sound into a larger than life rock sound, but as orchestral instruments.
What kind of audiences are there when you're performing? I used to play a violin, and I'm a big metalhead, so you could imagine that I would be there. But what kind of audiences does that type of arrangement of music attract?
It's a very wide demographic. I find we usually do meet and greet, which is awesome because you get to talk to the people who are coming to see the show in the evening and actually get a feel for them, and they get to ask us the questions. And it's a very wide demographic. I wouldn't actually say that you even actually have any true metalheads in the audience. Besides, you got, I think one track that we do is Iron Maiden, and you've got the people that know that one. We do Ace of Spades, and immediately, that song hits them straight away, and you get that metalhead connection, But it's a very, very, very wide demographic. I can't even pinpoint anything. It's all ages, young and old. It's great. It's great when music can actually bring such a wide demographic together.
This is very authentic. How do you maintain your own authenticity while you seem to be pushing genre boundaries? And you seem to be pushing them really far, from going from a diamond head, doing metal and loving pop in the past and trying to sing Justin Timberlake, metal into this new genre that is just incredible, to be fair with you.
Well, I think you're always on a journey. Like I said, I've been approached to do auditions for bands that were way outside my comfort zone, and you just got to deep dive in and try and find the tools. In this, I'm not actually allowed to mention who the band was because of NDAs, but in this case, it was a band that needed a vocalist that could do the deep growl and very aggressive heavy metal, which I was not fully capable of doing at the time of the audition. I could sort of scrape by, but not to the quality that I actually thought was fine. Needless to say, it didn't really go through anyways, unfortunately, although that would have been a fun project to be part of. I think with anything as a singer, you're always trying to broaden your set of skills and sounds. Ultimately, I think singers need to maybe focus on the fact that you are a sound machine and not necessarily just a singer on a one-purpose train. You gotta branch out. It's more fun.
Just like in the beginning of your journey in the UK, when you said, I used to be in a flat with 14 different nationalities. That's the diversity that makes you who you are today. And if you want the diversity in music, I think UK is exactly the country where you should be. Going from one place to the other, and it really took you really far. Now let's talk about technicalities here. How do you personally navigate the interplay between raw performance, which you have, and orchestral precision, especially in production and, of course, in performing?
Well, in performing, it's really up to speaking to who is in charge. In the case of London Symphonic Rock Orchestra, I had to just very clearly ask, what am I allowed to do and what am I not allowed to do? Because I know what I'm like on stage, and I'll find whatever I can jump off and see if I can do something crazy, just because it's a playground for me. And it's about creating a dialogue and understanding where is my place in this, because obviously there's an orchestra and you don't necessarily need a wild Neanderthal Viking running around and headbanging, jumping off monitors and climbing up the walls. That might not be, what the show needs. So it's all about a dialogue. In this case, me and Jesse are very different people, very different singers, but we navigate things differently, but we have a dialogue with the producers and they clear up what they want. But yeah, it's all about finding your feet in the right place there. You know, when it comes to orchestra arranging and all that stuff, I don't do any of the stuff for London Symphony Rock Orchestra, but I obviously do it in other parts of the business in my career, including what was done on the Coffin Train, which is my arrangements, etc. But it's all about balance, you know.
Just like in life, right? Just like in life. It's all about balance, isn't it?
100%.
Tell me, Ross, before I let you go, looking ahead, are you exploring any new projects or soundscapes, whether it's classic, pop, or heavy music, or cross-genre? Experimentation will take center stage. If so, what can we expect in terms of your sonic evolution?
That is a very good question. I think, as much as I've come from both jazz and pop. And
now we jazz, talking about jazz too, all right? You missed an entire great genre of this world, but thank you. Yeah, continue.
No. The jazz was very educational. It's taught me probably some of the most valuable parts of both my voice, but even more so my ears, in how to hear the details within harmonic structure and music. But where will the road take me? I can't say that yet, but I know it's going to be fun. I think it's about time that I sort of dive away from fitting into other people's shoes or other platforms and maybe try and explore where I might find my journey to go, which I imagine will be somewhat heavy and aggressive and Viking-like, maybe.
And a year from now, we see Roz in a boy band.
Never.
I'm keeping this.
It will never happen.
There you go. It will never happen, obviously. Keep heavy metal. That's who you are. Such a Viking.
I will say, if you ever want to hear a heavy metal version of Backstreet Boys?
Yes. Actually, yes, I have. It's really good.
Frogly.
Imagine that 30 years ago. Come on. They'd be even bigger. They would be even bigger than they were. I doubt that. It was a wrong time, I think. Now it's the time. Roz, do you ever go home to Denmark? Do you ever do that? Do you miss your origins?
I do. I don't go home as often as I'd like. You know, it's working in the industry. You don't really get much time off. It's all just grafting and finding the work and keeping on the road, touring and performing and keeping the instrument in check, or writing more stuff. So I don't really get to go home that often, but I do definitely miss the Danish culture. There is regardless of me living here, there is a very different feel when you go back to Denmark, just on the whole. And I think that's down to our Danish culture of hygge. To quote Lemmy said it the best way: when you're on stage, people don't want to see an ordinary person. They want to see a monster. And I think that's something for anyone who goes on stage to abide by in their performance and their personality. You know, you got to live the music, you got to breathe it, and you got to project it. That's really what people want to see when they're in the audience.
And it's all show business, baby, isn't it?
Well, I think it's show business, but it's still, without saying this is going to be cheesy, but it's soul business. You know,
soul business. Do you disconnect with yourself when you're on stage? What happens when you're there?
Depends. But
do you ever get nervous, by the way?
I never really, not anymore. I think the only time I got nervous was the first time I did the London Symphony Rock Orchestra, because you know, in the business you don't get to have rehearsals, so you just get, here's the information, learn it, get ready, go, and then you just got to hope that you've got everything crossed. And that was a bit tricky because there's 11 people in the orchestra, and you have to remember each person's full name and introduce them at the end of the show. So that's a lot of names to remember. So I think that was the first time in a long time that I have been just a little bit nervous. But, you know.
Don't you miss it? Don't you miss the adrenaline at least? I mean, being nervous is good. It's good, right? You don't. You're like, I just want to do this really good. I don't miss the nervousness.
I don't miss the nervousness, but I don't get nervous. You always get the adrenaline anyways. And honestly, the more time you can be on stage and actually have the space to connect with the experience is great. Often you are so focused on what's happening that you don't always get the chance to really connect with I'm here, you're here, etc. You sort of do when you do some of the performance, but you never really get to fully disconnect. You're always in sort of work mode. and trying to remember what you plan to do for crazy stunts or jumping off things. And
I mean, imagine what goes through your head when you were on stage with Diamond Head for the first time. You're like, I'm this boy from Denmark. I'm this pop person from Denmark, loves pop music. Look at me.
Yeah. It was something like, I'm just trying to remember all the lyrics and try and get this right and trying to figure out how I'm going to be on stage. And it was terrible.
It was, right?
It was terrible.
Thank God it's over, right?
I admit it. But, you know, you got to start somewhere, and everything's a learning experience, and you just grow from that.
Yeah.
You know, you go from that to, you know, getting told off by, you know, venues for climbing up the walls on, you know, special rigging. Actually, I think that was when we were on the last tour. I did crawl up or climb up the side of the, what was it, the venue. And there's only one other person that's done that before, and that was Bruce Dickinson. But I don't think he got told off. I got told off big time.
Well, he's Bruce Dickinson.
That's
it's a horrible thing to say, but you did save your reputation. Reputation is very important. Raz, I'm really excited about seeing where your journey takes you next, and I'm looking forward to seeing you on stage as well, in person as well. Yeah, good luck and thank you for being with us.
Pleasure, thank you.
Toliko u Pulsu planete za ovu sedmicu. Ove i ostale vijesti svijeta možete i dalje potražiti na našem sajtu newsmaxbalkans.com kao i na našim društvenim mrežama. Ostanite uz nas.